It's really easy for people to assimilate a lot of information, a lot of links, write a bunch of stuff. But if it's not from the heart, it's not heartfelt, it's not super relevant, and it's not summarized in the way that our ADD can digest it, I think people will lose the audience.
Welcome everyone to today's live stream. I'm your host, 𝐲𝐨𝐢𝐽 𝐒𝐭, and today we're talking about this topic of whether email newsletters are still important when you're building your startup community, right? And now I know some of you might be thinking, right, wait, it's 2024 and we've got all these social media platforms, right? And digital channels that are right at our fingertips. So are email newsletters still even worth the effort? Well, that's what we're going to dive into today, right? We're going to explore why email newsletters can still be a powerful tool for creating that direct, meaningful connections with your audience, especially at a time where I think people are craving real authenticity and community, right? So I'm really thrilled to welcome back our chief nobody and visionary, Mark McNally. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, 𝐸𝐴𝐽.
So, Mark, I'm excited to get into this topic because, you know, it could be overwhelming. Honestly, there's so many different ways to connect with our audiences, right? We've got social media, we've got video content, we've got podcasts, you name it. And so with all these options, it's easy to think that email newsletters are a thing of the past, right? I mean, why use email when you can press a button and reach thousands of people with a post or a tweet? So I would love to hear your perspective on with the rise of social media. Some people are feeling like email is outdated. What do you believe? What are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, yeah, email is really interesting. You know what they say, like bell bottoms come back in style. Like, wait, if you don't throw away your old styles because the things come back full circle. I think email has come full circle. I would broaden it to not just say newsletters. I would say even direct email. So when I started my career, in the late 90s in the internet age, when we were all using AOL disks to get on the internet, emails were huge. Email newsletters were huge. Direct email was massive. I remember days when you could send out a direct email and you could get, almost a universal open rate. You get like 60, 70% open rates, which is crazy today. And you would see, if you're asking for call to action, it wouldn't be crazy to see 6, 7, 8% return, click-through ratios of response. So it used to be just a cash cow. A lot of companies, when we first started, and email is new to us. That was where we got our information. That's where we lived, and that's how we interacted. And it was still a small enough world that we weren't being overwhelmed like we are now on social, right? So it's kind of like the only place to get information. All our sites back then were very static, so you weren't getting real time information from websites. And so, yeah, email became the thing. And when you got a message from someone, if it was an email, like in a direct email campaign, it wasn't so overwhelming yet. And so you could cut through the noise and people pay attention and they'd read it to decide if it was important. But this is back when, we would read 2-page emails. Now we'll read 10 sentences max or 5 sentences, right? So that's on the direct mail has actually come full circle in a really interesting way in the last couple of years. So there's some practitioners that have really worked on this. There's a whole art form to how to have your emails be not blocked. There's a process of building your list, warming up your lists. But if you do that properly, and there's a lot of people who know how to do that well, there's services now that'll do it for you. But if you do that well, you can get into a lot of inboxes. And actually the response rates today compared to like paid media or something else are pretty compelling. So I think it's a lot of marketers have dropped direct email from their toolbox. I think some of the savvy ones have added that back in as one of their mainstays. It takes a little bit longer of investment, but it can really be a gift that keeps on giving. Especially in terms of email deployment is relatively low cost compared to paid media. So once you've built that email list, it's something that you can continue to use. I think you said newsletters. Well, newsletters are a couple different things. I think why you kind of framed it like why are newsletters interesting when you have social media. I think it's exactly the opposite. Newsletters are interesting because of social media. Like, what is social media? We're just thumbing through our feeds, we're clicking on the things that are interesting, and then we're off to the next. And And there's whole entire days or weeks where you might be busy or traveling or have a lot of meetings and you don't get a chance to digest the social media as much. One of the thesis of the studio is that there's whole industries that are being radically transformed as we speak, and more so than we've ever seen, I think, in history. So everything from clean tech and climate tech to AI, robotics, electric vehicles, fintech. There's so many things happening so fast. Anybody who's tried to, keep track of AI in the last year and a half has seen how overwhelming the breaking news is every single day. Credible, relevant people in the space making announcements, making comments, being interviewed on podcasts. You literally can't keep up with it in real time. It's impossible. At least if you have a calendar like me, it's impossible to keep up with it in real time. So what is a newsletter in that case? A newsletter is like a summary. It's like, okay, what did I miss this week? And if I can look at one newsletter at the end of the week and see 30 interesting news, breaking news stories that I should have known, and a couple interesting comments and stats or whatever else, then I can get caught up in a whole bunch of industries in a relatively short period of time. I tend to do that in my evenings. I do that at the end of my week on Friday afternoons. I'll do it over the weekend, but it's how I stay in the know. But I don't have the free time to be on podcasts and scroll through social all day. So to me, the newsletters that have emerged out there are super, super valuable for me to stay in tune without getting distracted throughout the days, right? And I think, AI is just an example, but there's been a number of newsletters have popped up just to organize all this information, and now a lot of them are 300,000 subscribers, 500,000 subscribers, 1 million subscribers. They came out of nowhere like in a year. So that tells you the demand's there. If you get to 1 million users in a year, our own newsletter will be launching around ChatGPT. We've got over 300,000 people signed up for ChatGPT. So it's a testament to how people do want to be in the know, and how they're looking for something to kind of summarize and make them more efficient. Social is not overly efficient place to get information.
Yeah, you raised some really interesting points about how they can help us cut through the noise, right? And help us reach our audience directly, especially like if you've got a good list of connections, right? And contacts and email list. And it's hard to do that on social media where posts can easily get lost, right? And then you're relying on algorithms to get your information in front of the right people. So let's continue to go a little bit deeper on this. Can you talk about some of the email newsletter campaigns that we've done at Nobody Studios, and how have they helped us build those stronger connections with our community, and something that maybe social media couldn't help us achieve?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of our audience, isn't necessarily living and breathing on social media.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a large group of investors. A lot of them are, my age. They have full-time professional jobs. They're just not living and breathing in social. And from the very beginning, I think there's a lot of things we got right, a lot of things we learned from or got wrong. But we really did try to lean into the storytelling and the transparency of our journey, and so it wasn't a whole lot of original. It wasn't hard to come up with original content every week or two. So we'd be like, well, what did we wrestle with this week? What did we mess up? What did we nail? What are we super excited about? What are we stressed about? And that just became the content. We just write openly about it. So I think early on, we started to grow the newsletter from folks that, we were doing a lot of conversations, socializing, what was going on, and everybody that we were talking to in any appointments, we were adding to the newsletter from the calendar. And we've kept a lot of those people stay on. Very small percentage of people have unsubscribed, but it's really been really interesting to talk to somebody maybe 6 months after the initial conversation, or 12 months after an initial conversation. And really, you only have a memory of talking to that person a year ago, but you get on the call and they know everything about what's going on in the studio. They're like, oh, that person seems like a great hire, and that new company is really exciting. And that's when you realize people are reading, and you're like, wow, I didn't know you even paid attention, and people are reading. And, I try to stay super accessible to our investors and stakeholders, but, some people I don't talk to as much as others. Some are hyper engaged, they reach out a lot, and I talk to them a couple times a week, and other people might go 6 months or a year before any meaningful kind of conversation. And when you join those calls and people have that same kind of feeling, like I was really impressed with how you handled that. By the way, this one thing you're trying to solve for, I might be able to make an intro. Like they are plugged in, and I just think it's really hard to do that at scale in a manual way. And so newsletters are super efficient. Now I think there's room for improvement. Our vision always was to have much more of a community built across the studio. And I think our community is strong. People reach out, they connect. We got, a lot of the culture is palpable. The people were very warm and giving. But if you get community right, newsletter is just a vehicle for it. But if you get community right, you're drawing connections and connecting dots that people didn't know needed to be made, right? And right now, I think we have a lot of gold under the waterline of the iceberg. Most of our best connections are still yet to be made, and so we're pursuing ways on how we can make those connections more automatic, more driven by our everyday work, and the newsletter will be a part of that. I'll just transition into how that applies to our companies. Webdelics is going through a revamp and some new features and a whole bunch of stuff that started out. We knew it was going to be a content site, but really the goal was always to become a community site. So content brings people in, and then the community shares, interacts, posts their own content, and it also becomes a viral piece of the growth. And so we're going to be making a big push to relaunch the community aspects of Webdelics, and the newsletter is going to be core to that. Instead of just being a thought leader answer here and telling you what I'm, what I want to put out, we're also looking for help. So if anybody's listening or has experience, there's a difference between putting out a curated newsletter, like, let me write the things I want you to read or what I want you to know about and send it out. There's a difference between that and a community or transaction-based newsletter. And they can be hybrid. They can be a little bit of both. But if you've registered for Reddit or you're registered for Quora or any of these kind of community content sites, their newsletters come out every couple of days, every week, but it's largely packed with, this is what people are talking about. These are the things that have happened on the network this last week. Sometimes they're a little clickbaity, but they suck you in because you're like, can you believe this topic about X, Y, and Z? 𝐸𝐲𝐢 said ... and you're like, oh wait, I want to see. And so they can be really instrumental in driving engagement if you get it right. I have found a lot of people have strong opinions about how to build a curated, published newsletter where it's like, I'm the author, you're the audience. I haven't really found experts yet on driving the community part of a newsletter and the transactional part of a newsletter. So definitely looking for experience sharing or introductions, or if someone's got that experience, I'd love to talk to them.
Obviously, like every strategy, our strategies have to evolve, right? And you gave it a good example of Webdelics, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about sort of some of the newsletter strategies that we've tried it and then it didn't work, and so we've changed it? What's worked well? What hasn't worked well? Maybe you could tell us a little bit more. You started to go there already.
Well, I can say on the studio level, you were very cognizant. Like I said, what our strengths were, I thought, was sharing very openly. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, I wrote all the newsletters, and so it was very, or at least I did the first draft. So it was a lot like the story of the CEO, founder. I could share a certain level of, transparency, personal, humility, et cetera. I could just share things more raw. And as over time, we had to get other people involved in writing it and curating it, et cetera. And unintentionally, we just kind of did this about 6 months ago. We took stock of it and realized we kind of morphed our voice into much more corporate, and that's when I started to read a few of them. Like, I don't recognize the newsletter anymore. It's not the personality or the culture of the studio. The personality and culture of the studio is much more real and transparent, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it also is meant to drive engagement, because if we're talking openly about the things that we're trying to solve for, that's when your community can come to life. And we would see that a lot when we wrote a more heartfelt email. We would get responses from people saying, you know what, I've got experience, or let me make an intro, or, so we were getting back what we were giving, and that's exactly what we wanted. So yeah, I think that's where we got it wrong. You're asking me what we got wrong or what things we didn't work. I think, it takes a lot of effort to maintain that kind of voice and tone. But if you step away from it, the value of those kinds of communications drops significantly in my experience.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree. I think I've read all of the newsletters we've put out, and the ones that really jump out at me are really where we're being very open and honest about what we're learning and where we need support, right? And I came across this thought-provoking post on LinkedIn that really got me thinking about this conversation. And it kind of said, like the traditional sort of funnels, right? Like email marketing newsletters are sort of on the decline. And it said things like phone calls and even email, right? It said that a lot of people, we keep our phones on silent. Often we don't even open emails with, unless they're from familiar contacts. When we consider the next generation, right? Gen Z, they're barely using email at all. They prefer platforms like Instagram and Snaps and all these other platforms, and they're completely engaging in different ways than some of the older generations, right? And so this poses an interesting challenge for us at the studio. How do we ensure that our newsletter content is going to resonate with these younger or these diverse audiences, right? So what are your thoughts on this topic?
It's getting harder, and I say this because there's a new generation that up until recently didn't really have, they weren't your primary focus. They didn't have control of the purse. They weren't making purchasing decisions, but now you've got a generation where, my kids are, in their mid-teens, and they do have emails, and they'll occasionally use it for things where that's required, but they'll even tell me not to text them, but to send them something on Instagram. Like that's their preferred messaging space, and I think a lot of people have this paradigm in their mind that Instagram is just a social place where you post memes and stuff, but there's an entire generation that's using it for their communication methods, and so I think that becomes an interesting problem to solve for. We have to, any marketers always having to evolve and adapt to new markets, and that's going to be one. I do think there's an interesting thing though. If you think, forget the novelty of when we first started having emails, for those as old as I am, 20, 25, 27 years ago. There was also a phase, maybe 5, 6, 7 years into it, like the early, mid 2000s, where, I preferred, everybody was starting to do the backlash against big, long emails. I stopped using email for communication methods. I started using other things like text or, verbal communication in person. And I started using email for okay, can you officially send me an email on that? Like it's where I wanted to capture, something in perpetuity, or I wanted officially on the record, right? So you started to use email for that purpose. And I think that the next generation is kind of doing that. If I look at my teens, they use emails for certain things and they're not against using it. And, it'll remains to be seen if, the hypothesis I was kind of sharing about why it's value now is going to translate to the next generation. But even if it doesn't, then the same idea of a summary of what happened is still going to be valuable no matter where they want to receive that, right? So it may not be an email newsletter, but it may be a link to a newsletter or landing page that goes into your DM and Instagram, right? It's still going to be here's what you missed this week, or this summary. I think that value isn't going to change regardless of how you get it to them.
Yeah, no, it's true. Cause I even me, I rarely check email. Like, I mean, it's very hard for me because you get so much newsletters and so many things that come to you. But when you're looking at different generations, like I had a call with a woman this morning who said, she's those 17, 18-year-olds that are now investing. Right. And they're not even looking at email. They're not even, like you said, they're using all these platforms, and that's how they're engaging with one another. So I started just quickly looking at like, what does Gen Z like and what is Gen X like? Right. And Gen Z likes those short, like visual content, very short, impactful messaging, like think eye-catching visuals, right? That convey a message quickly. Whereas Gen X likes those in-depth articles and informative content where they want to like get value from it and learn insights from it. So I think when we're crafting our newsletter campaigns, we really have to keep these generational differences in mind. And I look at it as like an add-on. There are some people that are not going to check their emails. They're not going to use certain platforms, but what can we do to be inclusive and try to make sure we get this in front of as many people as possible? So Mark, what are some of the mistakes you've seen with startups making with their newsletters, and how can we avoid them? I know you talked about making them too corporate-y, right? That's one of the things that really resonates with us. But what are some other mistakes you've seen?
I actually think the attention deficit problem is spanned across generations now. I think 50 and 60-year-olds are struggling to read more than a few sentences just as much as a 15-year-old. So I do think that we've all, as a society, migrated towards get to the point quick, give me what I need, right? So I think that's going to be interesting to watch, overall that evolve. I think that one of the things that's happening in the newsletter space, which is interesting, is one of the natural places for AI is to help create content. And it's wonderful. It's also, people are exhausted by it. And I think there's kind of a GPT overload right now where it's really easy to produce a lot of stuff, but that doesn't mean it's valuable. And it's just this idea that it takes a lot of effort to make your words concise and only the most important information. It takes the most effort to do that. So I think that's where newsletters are going to be going wrong, is that it's really easy for people to assimilate a lot of information, a lot of links, write a bunch of stuff. But if it's not from the heart, it's not heartfelt, it's not super relevant, and it's not summarized in the way that our ADD can digest it, I think people will lose the audience.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that. And it's resonating. George Fisher, thank you for joining us. He said very informative. And I see my good friend Ajit Dodani joining us as well. Great to see you there, Ajit. Thank you for joining. And I was thinking about one of the reasons why I have started not looking at these newsletters is because I'm on the go. As a busy single mom, I'm constantly running around, right? So when I'm waiting for my son to finish soccer or I'm traveling for work, I'm on my phone. I'm not pulling out my laptop. And what I notice is a lot of these newsletters, they're not optimized for your phone, right? And so I get frustrated when I'm like looking. Nothing frustrates me more when I'm trying to finally read a newsletter and then it's not formatted to my phone, right? So I think making sure if you're going to do that is optimize it so that people can look at it on their phone. Otherwise it creates a frustrating experience and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, right? And so one of the things you started to say, is that we're specific challenges at the studio that we're looking to solve right now regarding our email newsletters. And so again, where do you think we need support for people that are watching or listening that may have experience, or maybe they're looking to solve this problem too? Talk to us a little bit about where we can use that support and how they can reach out to us.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we're very transparent. You can reach out to us anywhere, Mark at Nobody Studios, 𝐲𝐢𝐲, ping us on our website, our socials. But, one of the things I highlighted was that, this idea of a transactional newsletter or a community-based newsletter where you're surfacing up things that happened in the community, or, it could be things like even like, I don't know, I think Venmo and, sometimes they'll say like, 𝐲𝐨 paid so-and-so, like kind of working in what's happening into the network, into the summaries is something we're trying to solve for right now. We're always still looking for expertise on newsletters, people who've successfully grown them, matured them, designed them, made them viral. We can't have enough of that, but it is a little bit easier to find than a transactional kind of newsletter experience. So those two for sure. Again, like I mentioned, aside from newsletters, direct email is something that I've just shared with you my understanding of some of the stats and how it's way more relevant than it was, for the last 15 years. So it's harder to find people with real experience in that. We've met a few great ones, but always looking to talk to other folks. So yeah, I think it's, those are the main areas. I think there's some evolving, like we just talked about, how newsletters are going to take different forms, and maybe not just email newsletters, but again, the concept of a newsletter being summarized information, how that's going to reach different, messaging platforms. Definitely, this can become really inefficient really quick if you don't figure out how to solve it, right? And so I'm sure there are people solving this, and I'm always looking for best of breed, or someone's like, oh, I use this great software or this great service or whatever. We're always all, ears wide open as much as we will share our own. I'd love to learn. I learn from people every day.
Yeah, great. And Ajit said he's got a 30% views when the newsletter is there to add value, right? That's the key, is rather than just trying to sell your services, you're adding value, right? And so how do you do that in a way that's going to capture the attention of people versus 2% when it's more transactional, right? And so everybody, thank you. This was such a important conversation. And Mark, before I let you go, right, if you had to give just one piece of advice to a startup founder, and I see a lot of people that are joining are founders here themselves, on how to leverage the newsletter to build their community, what would it be? One piece of advice.
I think transparency. I think it's really comes back to what Ajit just said. I think that the more you can be real and push the boundaries of transparency, the more people will, just build that connection with the brand and feel intrigued to follow your story. It's like a series on Netflix or something that you finish one episode and you can't wait to watch the next one. Like that only happens because, you're transparent. And I think a lot of people think I got to write the marketing copy and the call to action, and that's great. But what else happened interesting in your company? You know, what are the challenges you had? What are some of the things you're excited about? You know, maybe a new competitor came out and you're like, hey guys, let's be honest about this. These guys kicked our ass in this way, but we're really excited about how we're gonna, you know, compete with them in these ways, and competition makes us all better. Like, just being vulnerable, pushing the boundaries of that, I think is required more and more. And if you're gonna summarize a bunch of stuff, like if you're gonna say, oh, here's 10 interesting articles in the industry this week or whatever, then you have to add value to it by like summarizing and telling people why it's important. It might just be one sentence. If you want to understand how this is going to affect this, this is a fantastic article by so-and-so, right? But you have to still help people decipher, because they're just going to scan through it. They're going to scan through, and a newsletter could have 30 pieces of content in it, or like tips of the iceberg. They might pick 1 or 2 or 4 to click on, but you've got to summarize it. Otherwise people are like, you're just giving me homework. You're giving me more stuff to do. I don't need a list of things to read. I need you to tell me what is interesting about the breaking news and why it's relevant to me.
Love it. Love it. All right, everybody. Well, look, remember, if you're starting your newsletter or you're looking to refine your approach, the key is, as Mark said, be transparent, stay authentic. And I think it's important to keep the lines of communication open as well, right? And so thank you everyone for joining us. Love the engagement today. I hope you found the insights that Mark has shared helpful in navigating your own newsletter strategies. And if you have any more questions or thoughts, feel free to drop your comments. Keep the comments coming in the section. We do read those and we'll respond to those. And as Mark said, you know, there are some needs that we have at the studio. So we'd love to hear how you're leveraging your email newsletter in your own startups, or if you've had any tips or guidance, reach out to us. And then don't forget, you know, we have all of our prior live streams on our YouTube channel. So if you want to learn about some of the other topics and some of the areas that we're looking to solve at the studio, you can check all of our prior live streams on YouTube at Nobody Crowd. Huge thank you, Mark, for joining us today and sharing your valuable insights. I hope everybody has a great week.